Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're continuing on with the second of our series of two-player shows, Player Expectations. We're having a format this year, like last year, where we have one guest. Tonight is Chris Rayborg of One Winning Pod. Chris, how you doing?
Good, Ken. Glad to be back.
And just like last year, Chris did a couple players, Tony Jefferson, and I'm forgetting who the other one was.
Gus Edwards.
Gus Edwards. There you go.
Yeah.
This year and tonight, we're going to do Patrick Ricard and Brent Urban. The format of these shows are going to take one offense and one defensive player. And as you know, we'll have positional review shows as we get closer to the season, into the preseason, probably, maybe even at the end of the preseason, to talk about where the Ravens are as a team. Those will have one person's opinion, aside from mine, to fold into this. But I think these shows are a good opportunity to get multiple opinions on the same position group by talking about, a favorite player's kind of role within each of those groups. So we'll talk about Patrick Ricard and Brent Urban today, and other running backs and other defensive linemen will come at a later date. So Chris, first of all, Patrick Ricard and Urban, why did these players speak to you in terms of choosing your pairing?
Certainly they're interesting in that I feel like there's a lot at stake with these players, and I do think that they're almost in some sense like transitional players. They're not going to be the players that you're most excited about going into the season. But certainly I think there's a lot of opportunities for just their roles to shift. So I'm hoping that the discussion will kind of reflect that.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right about that. Let's talk about Patrick Ricard first, who had arguably his best year ever in 2022. He played approximately 200 more snaps than his previous high. His run blocking remains the best in football of any non-offensive lineman. So you can take running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, anybody you want. There's not one other player in the NFL who run blocks as well as Patrick Ricard does, if you're not an offensive lineman.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that too with the snap count. I think somewhere 64% of the snaps on the offense last year. Definitely a career high. I think the closest one, I think, was the year before, like 57 or something. But it's definitely been trending up. Like you said, run blocking, definitely superb. I think, if we're kind of transitioning over to kind of fit, this is the biggest thing of like, you'd love to get Ricard more snaps, but also you look at the rest of the offense and you really don't want to get him more snaps either.
It's interesting. I really do want to get to that about how he fits within a Monken offense, whether or not they're going to put more receivers on the field. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the 2022 Ravens and who they were with Ricard, because I think that's very hard to ignore. I think that, the Ravens want to retain a certain percentage of their identity. In a sense, if they have the lead, they'll want to have this identity available, is to grind games out in the way they have successfully since Jackson got here. But last year, they played the heaviest alignments in recent years, probably actually of all time on a relative basis. I mean, all time in NFL history. I'm not exaggerating this. They played more than 2.3 heavies per play. That's tight end, running back, fullback, and sixth offensive lineman. So that's extremely unusual in terms of that. And I'm sorry, that does not include the running back, does not include the tailback.
Okay.
It's extremely unusual to do that. Only the 99 Vikings had been even close to 2 in recent years. I'm sorry, 2019 Vikings, not the 99 Vikings.
I was going to say 99. You have
Moss
that's
a long time
Carter.
Yeah, that's a long time ago. So anyway, the 1.99 had been the closest in recent years. That's so far out of line that I have to believe, in terms of relative to the average that the league is playing at the time, this is probably the heaviest any team has ever played in the history of the NFL. If it's not, it's certainly been decades since there's been a team that's decided, yeah, we just want to run the ball right down your throat and we'll see what happens, kind of thing. Ricard had 450 run blocking snaps per PFF, and that includes a playoff game. So it's a 17-game season, not a 16. But the next highest in the NFL was Juszczyk with 122 less run blocking snaps. And that's among all people who would be considered running backs or fullbacks, or are considered running backs or fullbacks by PFF. It includes penalty snaps as well, by the way. So that's included in that total. I was astounded by that difference, and it really underscores just what the Ravens were in terms of being a heavy offense last year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, we probably talked about it. Plenty of people of just the positional lack of positional depth at wide receiver, injuries, obviously, forced the Ravens' hand to run more heavy than they would have liked, at least beginning of the season. And I think obviously having the two tight ends as rookies. I know Kohler didn't come on until very much later in the season, but they had a lot of tight ends as well that they wanted to get involved. So. Yeah, I guess in that lens, it doesn't surprise me that they went so heavy. But yeah, it's definitely been interesting just with the Ravens having this offense that they've had, wanting to use the fullback more. It's not a surprise to see them on top, but that discrepancy between us and Juszczyk and the 49ers, it's definitely telling.
It's remarkable to me. You look at the listing of guys. There's only 8 fullbacks or so in the entire NFL, but this really interested me. There's only, of the running back group as defined by PFF, and I don't usually report PFF numbers here, but I thought this was really interesting. There was no other player with more than 60 run blocking snaps who PFF graded over 60.1. Now, 60 is basically a zero score for your play. So it'd be unusual that you wouldn't have some people over and some people under to do that. Ricard's overall run blocking number per PFF was 88.6. Don't really care about the exact number. Obviously, he gets a lot of his very high grade from the fact that he has a very high number of snaps with good blocking. So it solidifies the sample size in the way they handle their overall grades. So to put it a different way, you can get a 70 every game for PFF, and you might have an 85 for your seasonal score, because it means that your average, your aggregate contribution is greater. And it's also more solidified in terms of it being there. So they have something with their small sample sizes that they fit in as a regression number. And that number, I believe, is 60 that they're throwing in for the number of snaps missing, so to speak. I'm sure people from PFF could explain it better. For people who are used to the old PFF system, that used to have the +2 and -2 system rolled into their scores, you could kind of see it aggregating throughout the season. That's why I like that system so much better, is you got a good idea of how much volume there was behind what was doing. But anyway, back to the point here. There's only one guy, and it was Kerry Blasingame of Chicago. Their fullback was second in the entire NFL with a run block rating of 63.7 to Ricard's 88.6. So it's just enormous difference between the number 1 and number 2 guy. And frankly, there's no other truly above average run blocking fullback or run blocking running back in the entire NFL who got any meaningful number of run blocking snaps.
Yeah, I mean that's just incredible. Yeah, I mean it doesn't matter who he's blocking for. If you want Gus Edwards running up the middle, you want Dobbins with a little bit more speed. I think he complements those all fairly well. So definitely a versatile player, good player for sure.
But the defenses, they obviously watch Lamar very closely. They also watch Ricard very closely in terms of where he's going to make a block, which is a good reason why defenses will run themselves out of position on these Lamar yank and run up the middle plays. And we saw that against the entire NFC East, basically fell into the same trap in 2020 as a group. Washington, Philadelphia, and Dallas, he had long touchdown runs, or long runs anyway, against all 3 of those teams, because each of those plays, they ran somebody out of position and messed up the play. It's something that's very nice that the Ravens have. And getting back to your earlier point, I am a little bit concerned that some of the effectiveness of Lamar will be lost with what I assume is going to be a reduced role for Ricard.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point you bring up in terms of just like Ricard's impact on, Ricard's impact, I guess, on some of Lamar's ability to read and make those cuts on the key plays. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly like it's something that we've wanted to add more explosiveness and more of a dimension to sort of the passing offense. But yeah, it's trying to reconcile. It's like, how can you be good both the passing and rushing? It's like you're going to have some elements of your game that you're going to just take a step back in because of it, exactly what you mentioned earlier, because of volume, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be practicing as much. You're not going to be using it in games as much. And yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way. I guess I was more of looking at Ricard's role in terms of his more traditional run blocking. But I mean, I think you're absolutely right. His ability to pull and kind of where he's going and sort of allow the defense to sort of react to him. Lamar's been able to kind of counter off of that as well.
Let me ask you another question. And you brought up Todd Monken earlier, and how the offense is likely to change. Obviously, the Ravens have got a 2016 football card collection of rookie cards in their wide receiver core now. So a lot of veterans. The question, I guess, is this. When Monken was introduced, he spoke specifically to a balanced offense is one that's challenging the defense to manage space all over the field well. And that, you don't have to do it by run-pass ratio. And, I think the teams have generally evolved into higher passing for a lot of different reasons. But one of the reasons is you challenge a team horizontally and vertically passing game, and you do more of challenging them horizontally with the run game. Roman was excellent at it, and the Ravens were very effective at it. But the definition that Monken uses alone, does it worry you, or does it make you wonder about Ricard's future when he says challenging space, all over the field? Because Ricard is a horizontal challenger and not a vertical challenger.
I mean, for sure. I mean, there were a lot of things I think about the Monken hiring. Now that we have clarity on Lamar's situation, I think some of them were kind of answered. But I know we had talked kind of before about just like, well, is Monken there for Lamar or not? But in any case, back to your question. Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to look at it, right? I think for a player like Ricard, although versatile, although a guy who obviously a great player at what he does. There's only so many ways to use him, right? And yeah, I think when you're talking about trying to space out the offense more, and look at who we drafted, look at who we brought in. I don't know. It seems like a numbers game, right? You can't have Ricard in there for 16 games if you're trying to have all these other receivers and tight ends on the field as well. So, and is it really worth having Ricard in there for 8 games a season? I don't really see that working long term. To me, this is sort of the transition year for him of figuring out, okay, how do we make him work, give him meaningful snaps this year? But to me, the year after that, like I would be surprised if he were here beyond 2023.
Okay, so your point with regard to the games is not that he wouldn't be active for all the games, because I would assume that he would be, but it would be that he would play only half as many snaps, so you're really only getting 8 games worth of Ricard activity.
Well, I mean, I think it could be both. I mean, I think it depends on the matchup, right? I think if if you want to have more, more blocking tight end role, I think Ricard is going to be playing more of that, right? But if you want to have Isaiah and you want to have Kohler on behind Andrews, like as better pass catching options from the tight end group, like I don't see how you have like all the receivers and all the tight ends and Ricard, right? I mean, I guess maybe in that situation you would have a step back, and maybe some of the wide receivers, maybe you only have 5 of them on game day or something. Maybe we have some injuries at that position group.
Pretty good bet with the age on this receiver group, by the way.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, for me. I mean, I maybe would look at this a little different. I'd say that I don't think you'd ever really see an inactive Ricard. He does some things on special teams. It's not a whole lot, but he's on the return team. He might also be on the kicking team. I'm not 100% sure whether he plays a wing or one of the blocking positions. But in any case,
yeah.
if you even if you didn't have that role, you could find somebody else to do those things. I think if you get ahead in a game, you still want to try and put a game away, and then you really want to be able to get heavy if you need to. Those wide receivers do you less good. And all you have to think about, if you're my age, is back to the Houston Oilers and their 35-3 lead against the Bills. I think it was 35-3. Yeah, 35-3 against the Bills in that playoff game, to know that a team that's all run and shoot and wide receivers and whatnot has a lot of trouble closing out games.
Right. Wasn't that the biggest upset in history until what, last year?
It was, let's see, I think it was still the biggest comeback, but did Jacksonville come back from a bigger deficit last year? It was 35-3.
Yeah, I thought so. We'll have to check on that, but
okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about who else Patrick Ricard is. I think one of the things we've really loved, I think Ravens fans as a group really love seeing him catch the football. It's not an area of strength, folks. I mean, he's got 4.5 yards per target career. 5.7 last year is a little better, but it's terrible still. Really, running back, wide receiver, wouldn't matter who you were. 5.7 is not good. I enjoy it as much as everybody else does in terms of watching him bully tacklers and not go down. Really take pride in just going out of bounds but not go down kind of thing. But it's just what he can contribute to the Ravens isn't as a receiver, unfortunately. I guess the question I have for you is, does it really make more sense to move Ricard to an inline tight end role for a good portion of his snaps, since the Ravens' other tight ends are more just pure flex receiving options?
I think, I mean, I'd love to kind of see the differences in snaps kind of for 2022 of where he was aligned, but I think it's situational, right? I think you can utilize him in both roles. I think, like you said, I don't think that he's going to be inline tight end and going out for catching passes very often. You might get one or two. The whole season is probably where I would put it at. But you put him out there as an extra blocker on play action or something like that. Could definitely see that in certain goal line situations or short yardage. Sure, put him behind the quarterback and have him block.
So this is kind of interesting. I got this from PFF here, but he's in line 365 times. And by the way, when I say in line, I don't mean going out for a pass. I just mean he was in line, and most of those times he was actually pass blocking or run blocking, as a tight end. But 365 plays in line, only 209 in the backfield, but that doesn't include his slot snaps, which are at 128, and those are all basically motioning into the backfield. He also has some wide snaps. I'm sure most of those are the same things. So,
okay.
There's obviously some variation of play there, but it looks like about half his snaps were plays where he actually was at the line of scrimmage this last year. And it actually looks like there was a trend in that as the season went along, that he played a little bit more in line. But anyway, interesting player, 4 straight Pro Bowls now. Definitely deserved it this last year. I hate to see a player who's so good at what he does suddenly not have a job because the team doesn't do it anymore. But if there's anybody who can respond with versatility to the problem, I think he'd be Ricard.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, this, as much as we want to kind of have the offense move into this, everyone has great receivers and, everyone's getting 1,000 yards and, 10 touchdowns a season or something. Even if that were the case, it's going to take time. So I think 2023, Ricard definitely has a place on this team. We haven't even really talked about, I know it's not the focus of this episode, but running backs this year, we're definitely, we're a little bit disappointing last year, still kind of taking time to recover over their injuries. I think going into this year, trying to maximize the value that we have from guys like Dobbins and Gus, Ricard's going to be a big part of that as well. So if we want a balanced offense, one that, as you said, like, as Monken said, I'd rather that we want to stretch both horizontally and vertically. Like, don't forget the run game. Like, it's going to be needed. Just will be a little bit of a different balance, I think, this year and moving forward.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to them not trashing what Roma did. And I think that the rest of the coaching staff, and most importantly, Harbaugh, wants to keep some of that, some of the scheme, institutional knowledge that the team has right now. He wants to keep that around. And at the very least, you want it to close out football games, but you really probably also want it on early downs as well, to have the option and, get yourself ahead of the expectation in terms of down and distance, give Lamar some easier plays to make on third and fourth down because of that. So, incomplete passes are one of the ways that a defense can force an offense off the field. And so you hope, there's a lot to be said for getting positive yardage on first down and staying on schedule. And that usually means doing it with the run if you want to do it fairly consistently. You mentioned 2024, next year, $4 million cap savings for cutting him. I'm like you. I think there's a lot of possibility he's gone after another year because of the incredible need to save money that this team is going to continually have during the Jackson second contract. And it's going to be very difficult for them to keep players like Ricard, who are very good in a more limited role.
Yeah. Maybe there's an option, do some sort of restructure or extension or something to be able to keep him there. I mean, the good news, I guess, for Ricard is that there's not that much, of a market for him. Just teams don't use fullbacks. So, obviously the Ravens have shown him a lot of faith, and by giving him the contract and allowing him to kind of be here for 4 or 5 years. I don't remember how many years he has accrued, but yeah, I mean, it might be an option, but yeah, it's seeming a little slim to me. It seems like something where you can have sort of like a tight end H-back sort of role, or figure out the blocking in other ways.
Right. So Ricard has actually been a Raven for 6 seasons already. So this is 7th year. It's he's getting close to the point. I don't know what it would take really playing in his position. It would probably take a championship for starters. But if he were to play 2 more years here, if he were to play out this contract, does he come into Ring of Honor consideration? I mean, it would be, let's say he plays the next 2 years and he continues with his Pro Bowl fullback, giving himself 6 Pro Bowls to his record and a championship. How could he not be? How could he not be?
Just the position. I think that's the only thing. I mean, when you say 6 Pro Bowls, that is impressive. But at fullback, when there's 6 to 8 fullbacks in the league, that's tough.
Yeah, I think the thing about it is he's towered over those fullbacks, and the great comment I like is like Babe Ruth in a Babe Ruth league, because Babe Ruth ball is like 12 and 13-year-olds or something. So I mean, he is literally towered over every other fullback in the game for so long at this point. The only guy who can touch him in terms of certain elements is Juice, and he's a guy who does some of it as a receiver, some of it's a receiver, and some as a blocker. In terms of just being the best blocker in the game, it's been undisputed for quite a long time now. And you have to start getting close. I mean, there's some longtime guys. Lorenzo Neal comes to mind. Sam Gash was around the NFL for a long time. A couple ex-Ravens right there. Vontae Leach would be a third ex-Raven. Amazing how a lot of them end up being that way. But there haven't been that many great fullbacks in recent NFL history. And Ricard certainly would have to be one of the guys you have to talk about in the 21st century team. Who would be among the greatest fullbacks the game has had. Man,
now I'm curious. I want to listen to a lot of the comments from the NFL Top 100, see what the players think. If he can get on the side of the players, I think that really increases his chances. I think
probably. And we're just talking Ring of Honor. We're not talking the Hall of Fame. Just the Ravens.
Oh yeah. I know. Yeah. But yeah, it might help.
Yeah, you're right. If there's a player vote involved in that at all, that would be kind of cool. Well, let's talk about what's a good season for Ricard and what's a great season. And it's really kind of hard to set a line in the sand for this, but go ahead and start us off with a good season. What does that mean to you here?
Good season for me. Like I said at the top, I think it's tough because in some sense it feels. I agree with you want to have the ability to close out games. Ricard helps you do that. But on the other hand, it's like 60%, 64% of snaps last year. That feels way too high for where we want this offense to go. So good season to me. I feel like, you maybe, cut his snap count, maybe say like 40% or something like that. Special teams, I'm sure will probably stay about the same ideally, maybe fluctuate a little bit, but if you drop the snap count by 20%, he continues to be, you know, the blocker we know he is. I think that's a good season. I don't want to quantify in terms of like, rushing or passing yards because, they're basically negligent, but
Yeah, that's perfect. That's
yeah,
that's absolutely perfect in terms of that certainly would be between a good and a great season. What you're saying, I didn't say it much differently. I said he's a big part of the offense on early downs and when closing out, and finds more snaps as an inline tight end. Actually, a fair amount last year, so maybe that doesn't even need to go up too much.
yeah,
In a way that does not impair offensive creativity much, and that's going to be one of the keys. If he's going to retain a lot of his snaps as an inline player, he's gonna handcuff Monken a little bit because him as an inline player generally is signaling to the other team that you have a sixth blocker. At worst, it means you don't need to take him too seriously as a receiver, and he's a one-on-one matchup. So it makes
yeah,
that part of it is easy for the defense. So I think that they probably will avoid that more than they did last year, where they seemed to really like it. So when we look at where he loses snaps, as much as I want him to find that inline tight end role, that might just not be realistic that they can do it. As much as they the other guys maybe aren't great at it, aren't ideal. Kolar and Andrews and certainly Likely are not ideal guys. Then maybe he has to stay as a backfield and motion player to really be of most value to the Ravens.
yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, if we're talking great, it would certainly be awesome to, figure out, hey, he can take advantage of a couple of those one-on-one matchups and, add a little bit more of a passing element to his game. Like we said, it's not his best, but I mean, we've seen him do a lot of things. I mean, heck, beginning of the season, he's playing, a two-way player. He's playing on defensive end. So, if he can add a little bit of that, if, 5 to 10 catches or something, being able to stretch some of the middle of the field or something. Not in terms of, vertical stretch, I guess, but, even, some wheel routes or, whip routes or something like that. Like, sure, be able to take advantage of some of those matchups.
I love to see him run a whip route effectively and lose somebody. That'd be a highlight film. That's no doubt about it. For a great season to me would be he essentially duplicates his 2022 season as a run blocker in fewer snaps. And I just don't see how it could possibly not be fewer snaps. But I would kind of set the line at 50% down from 64 to 50. And here's the reason why. It'll be a great year if Patrick Ricard is helping the Ravens close out games, and that's how he's going to accumulate a lot of his snap count, is by still being in there when the Ravens have a 2-touchdown lead and helping them do what they've done to win games for 5 years now in the Jackson era. Is just, be a guy who can get you to 4th and 1 a lot of the time pretty easily, or get you a first down on either 2 or 3 downs by helping your run block. And the Ravens have done very well with either of those situations. It's been an effective way. So that, to me, that would be a great season. Basically, 50% of snaps, still the same run blocker he is. Ravens are closing out games because of it. That, to me, would be the cherry on the cake.
That would have to be a really good offense. I mean, that sounds like 2019 levels in terms of like really closing out games for a full quarter to be able to hit 50%.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you don't tend to get as many total offensive snaps when you're very conservative about running the football. The teams that get a lot of snaps are teams that are trying to come back furiously in the fourth quarter and have a lot of 10-play drives for 6 yards a play because the defense is letting them do that.
Right.
All right. Well, great discussion on Patrick Ricard. Let's move on to Brent Urban, big friend of the show here. We had him on a while back. I really urge people to go back and listen to that episode. It is pure gold from a football understanding perspective. And it's also a great personal story of a guy who came from Canada, how he played hockey, was an enforcer basically at that, which is not a stretch to understand that. He would give Zdeno Chara a pretty good run for his money in terms of size and shape on the ice, certainly. But also a guy who then had to go through a recruiting process could move from a Canadian football player to go get offers from American schools and some of the background that went into that. And then all the discussion about how he actually plays to deny space. Very well done. So I encourage people to go back and look for that episode if you can. If you can't find the link, DM me or just respond to the show after you've listened to it. in Twitter, and I'll make sure I put the link out there if I forget to do it. But still a good 5-tech here in his 8th season. This will be his actually 9th season and second tour with the Ravens.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of 2022, I mean, I think he was a great depth piece. I think, we didn't have to rely on Calais as much in certain roles, especially I think later in the season. I feel like Urban had a few more snaps going into that. And a good rotational piece as well with, guys like Broderick Washington, Matabuke as well. Sort of a secondary vet presence, but a guy who could give you some meaningful snaps down the stretch.
Now, you mentioned Calais Campbell. His departure is going to put a strain on this defense like I don't think Ravens fans really understand in terms of who has to play additional snaps. In a lot of ways, Campbell was the putty that held the defense together with his versatility to play on the edge, at nose on an obvious passing down, if that's where you wanted him, at 3-tech on a lot of early downs where he's a matchup nightmare for whoever he's against. And a lot of players are going to have to take an increased role to do some of the things that Campbell did very well. Urban is probably one of them because Urban is a pure 5-tech. It's his ideal position. He's a 3-5 versatile guy. He can even play on the edge if you need him to, something the Ravens were okay asking Campbell to do this last season. But he's definitely got to be there to take some of what Calais did away from other linemen.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong. I think he's the only guy on this roster right now who really has some of the length that Calais had. I mean, even some of the other defensive ends, like they're not really that sort of the, tall, huge wingspan sort of guys. Certainly they can provide pressure at those spots, but if we're talking that sort of versatility, it's definitely unmatched.
Urban has certainly made a career out of being a leverage guy, plays reasonably low, but also has outstanding length. So he's getting the pass. And by the way, you guys hear me and some of you, have some fun with me and my desire to have offensive linemen who have long arms. Brent Urban is the reason why. It's defensive linemen like him. It's also defensive linemen who can work effectively with one arm and get longer that make it very difficult on short-armed offensive linemen. And, he basically talked about being excited about how, if he gets to stunt or move across the face of a guard into a center, how that can give him his advantage. And in his case, he still has to go with 2 hands to do it. So a really long-armed center could still give him trouble, but in his case, he's able to work pretty effectively against shorter arm guys. And that's a lot of who's there at center in the NFL these days. A lot of guys who didn't work out at other positions. They tend to be pretty good offensive linemen or pretty decent offensive linemen anyway, but they have size limitations. Tyler Linderbaum's right in the group, but so are a whole bunch of other centers in this league. Let's we move on a little bit here. The 5-tech role, I talked to Brent a little bit about this on our episode, but it's of reduced importance in the NFL. And there's a reason for that. So when 11 personnel completely dominates offensive scheming now across the NFL as a whole, not for the Ravens, not in the past or in the Greg Roman era, but for every other team and basically all the teams that don't use a fullback with any regularity. 11 personnel is primarily what they use. They use some 12, but they use mostly 11, and they're in there. And you don't, when that's on the field, if it's other than on first down, where you still find some teams that are okay moving a safety up on a slot receiver, most of the time, that 11 personnel is going to be met with a nickel defense. So they'll come into the slot corner, they'll still have 2 safeties, and they'll really be defending against the pass right from first down. In offensive coordinator parlance, you are forcing the nickel when you put a third receiver on the field. That's what Pat Kerwin has referred to it as, and it's something you see. Well, with that, the Ravens found a way still to get Urban and 3 defensive linemen on the field these last few years by using this jumbo nickel package. Now, other people may call it penny or whatever. I like the coinage to be solid. So you have 5 defensive backs on the field. I want that to be some sort of nickel. So jumbo nickel means you have 3 defensive linemen, but you sacrifice an inside linebacker in that case. If you have good run-fit safeties, then that makes a lot of sense. But the Ravens are no longer in that position. They have Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith, and they want them on the field as they demonstrated for the last half of last year.
Yeah, for sure. And, re-signing Roquan as well. Like, he's not going anywhere. I mean, that's just an interesting formula of. I mean, what do you think in terms of Urban's usage then for we're going into 2023?
Well, I think he's on the field with 4 defensive backs a lot, because then you can stay in your base defense, and you've got 4. Well, let's map it out. You got 4. You've got 3 defensive linemen. You've got 2 outside linebackers for 5. You got 2 inside linebackers for 7. You have 4 defensive backs. So that's the base defense, and that's what he'll see a lot of action in. He'll see other action as a 3 tech in the nickel. So even though they'll only have 2 defensive linemen on the field, he'll still be a guy who lines up over guard, and he'll be fine at that. It gives him an opportunity to do some things he likes to do, crossing the face of a guard and whatnot, or just getting a straight one-on-one matchup against a guard. Most of his career, he's lived though off making a one-on-one matchup against an offensive tackle. You don't think of that as being a thing a defensive lineman would like to do, but he's been just extraordinarily effective at managing space very well within the Ravens defense, usually getting a little bit of push, usually knowing how to keep his hand free on which side is appropriate, and being able to make running backs be forced into difficult choices about where they want to bounce. Do you want to go the long way and go outside? Do you want to cut back to the inside where his free hand might be? Is he denying space such that he's going to see your move and he's going to push that lineman to close that gap more and make an easy tackle for a linebacker? But the thing that is the consistent thread through all this is Urban helps other players make tackles more than he makes tackles himself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even looking at some of his career stats, I feel like, you may rarely see like 30 some tackles a season. Even I think his best season with the Bears, I believe, is kind of under 30 tackles. Definitely believe that. I feel like even last year, there are a couple plays that kind of come to mind of just, you see him having an impact on a lot of these, but you end up seeing like a big play from like Owe or Queen or something, be able to kind of make the tackle and force a turnover or something. But Urban's always around, but yeah, almost never getting the key stats, I think.
Yeah, really understands team defense, and that came out very clearly. The other thing that is very good and is not realized just how useful this technique is. On early downs, a defensive lineman has to oftentimes hold their juice in terms of the rush. They can't just rush willy-nilly. They can't penetrate without. They may be schemed up for one guy to do that, but it's usually you have to maintain your rush lanes. You have to consider play action and what might happen with a run. And so you've got to not go all out to try and penetrate against your opponent. You've got to 2-gap him. And Urban is very good at that. And the way you can still impact the pass when you're 2-gapping, you can push the pocket and you get effective there. And that's some of his game, but it's not really the top thing. The best thing he does, he gets his hands up. And he's so tall that he has a good chance to deflect passes under those circumstances. I think the Ravens as a team have gotten pretty good at that. But last year, of course, in the Saints game, he had the deflected pass that got picked off by JPP. I think that's just JPP and not Houston, because Houston was everywhere in that game.
Yeah, I believe you're right. Yeah, I think it was JPP. Yeah. I mean, that's that one thing I'm definitely excited for him this year, just to kind of, obviously we'll see where his snap counts get, but he's always, I think, been effective in that. Even when his first stint with the Ravens, he was the one who blocked the last field goal against the Browns as well.
6, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's always fun to kind of watch him be able to get those pass deflections and see what the rest of the defense can make of it. So definitely excited for that.
That was his first NFL game that day. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Last year, on a very small scale, he did not have a good tackling year. Now, you're always kind of dealing with a small sample size because Urban doesn't make a lot of tackles. He creates opportunity for tackle more with his run defense, but he missed almost twice his previous career mark in a small sample size. It's like 4 out of 20 or something, about 20% of missed tackles. So that's something I would hope that would improve. Another underrated element of value that the Ravens really take advantage of, though, is the 54th man roster versatility. Now, here's a key. You know what I'm talking about, Chris. You could go ahead and talk to it.
Yeah, I mean, he's. Are you talking about the cut down, or are you
Yes,
talking
yes, the
about?
cuts.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly, yeah. He'll be a guy that he knows the organization. He knows he'll be able to bring him back. So if Ravens are going to want to get a guy and slip him on the IR when the roster's cut down before week one, he's your cut candidate.
Yeah, and there
Yeah,
there probably are several. There's usually a special teams guy that they really like in this role. Last year they had about five. They cut Tony Jefferson. I was actually getting worried about that because I thought he'd be back in the special teams captain, honestly. But they have other guys who they can cut and aren't a big risk to sign with another organization.
yeah,
It's you don't want to get held up for dollars. You want your handshake agreements to hold up. But one thing he's very understanding about, he goes, if they want a 57-man roster, then and I can help that, that's great. I think it's just smart organizational management to do that. So that 54th, and really you want 55, 56, and 57 a lot of years
yeah.
as well. That versatility is tremendously valuable. By the way, if you want to figure out, it's a fun game to play. Look through the guys who have at least 5 years of service, because those are guys who, if they're cut, they don't go through the waiver process, which is the key.
Okay.
Waiver process,
Okay.
you get
Yeah.
claimed, but if you're 5+ years, look at those guys. You can sort by that right on the Ravens roster on the website, and you get a good idea of like, oh yeah, he might be cut and brought back, and you'll find a number of guys that fit into that category. Usually, there might be 2 to 4 that you could do it with, and then you might be taking a chance. Let's just pick a player. Kayvon Seymour might be a player that fits into that category this year as well, or Daryl Worley if they want to keep on the roster. I mean, it's those kind of players that are usually pretty good bets. Let's talk about a good season and a great season.
Good season for me. I think I feel like we talked about at the top, like, there is no replacing Calais Campbell, but if he could be doing, 50%, I think, of what Campbell was doing for, around his snap count last year, urban snap count last year. I think that's effective. I think if we're talking about a great season, certainly would love to see, a few more pass deflections, a couple sacks from him. I think, could be within the realm of possibility for him. I don't remember what his career high was, but again, I feel like, to your point of, making opportunities for other people. Great season. I think if he could get 2 or 3, I think that's really great for him. But at least a good season. I think if he could do 50% of what Calais did in this role, and while rotating with some of these other younger guys, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I have a good season as continue with a 3-5 role and play snaps as needed. I'm not even going to try and define it. If last year the team played 2.22 defensive linemen per snap, and that includes the postseason game. That's a lot higher than the Ravens have played in recent years. Now, let's break this down a little bit. If you play nickel defense every single snap the entire season, you should play 2.0 defensive linemen per snap. They play a little bit more because they play some base defense with that. They also play a little bit more because they didn't have a lot of three outside linebacker packages or 4s this last year. They had many fewer because, and the primary reason was the first half they had all those injuries at outside linebacker, where they almost didn't have 3 guys who could stand up at the position. So they needed more this last year from the defensive line. I hope the total defensive line snaps are cut significantly this year, which will help make up for Campbell. But the Ravens' edge depth right now is not giving me that warm fuzzy about that. Now it's looking like the defensive line kind of needs to make up for some of Campbell's lost snaps. So.
Yeah, for sure. It's certainly a position group. I'm sure we'll have to talk a lot more about this season, but there's potential there, but it's a big question mark, I think, all things considered.
Yeah, we really need another body there, frankly, and maybe even a guy who's a more versatile edge who is an obvious kick inside candidate. JPP was a good one. Houston is really more of an edge guy, so it ends up being on Oweh or Bowser or somebody else to move inside or to move off the line of scrimmage to present a different look in the pass rush. And the smaller players kicking inside, I really don't like. I like it when a guy who's 265, 275, 290 can kick inside. I love that. that I'm happy with it. So what it may end up meaning is the Ravens have to play 2 defensive linemen on some pass rush situations again. And I think that's probably suboptimal unless they suddenly find the magic with some player, whether it's Matabika, I think will be out there anyway, because I think he's the ideal guy, but maybe Travis Jones, steps up and all of a sudden he's a tremendous penetrator on the inside, or maybe he just presents that penetration risk and the other teams really step up to try and block it. And that creates opportunities for other players. So yeah. I really like, I would really love for that to happen because I think it needs to happen. I think somebody on the defensive line needs to step up on pass rushing downs and provide something. So I don't think that'll be Urban's role. I think Urban is more of an early down player. I think his days of playing on obvious passing downs are probably over. But he still provides something valuable when the other team passes on an early down, and that we talked about earlier. I'll give you my good and great season real quick here. I think I did with the good season, just basically continues on in a 3-5 role, playing snaps as needed, undefined, manages spaces against the running back as we've seen before. And the important thing is that he provides this roster versatility that allows him to be the 6th defensive lineman and allows somebody else to get on the roster. It's a valuable component of what he brings to the table right now. And so that would be a good season. Again, I've picked my good and great season. So good is a 60th percentile and great is an 80th percentile. So I'll give you my 80th percentile is this. His role increases from the loss of Campbell. So he played 26.7% of the snaps in 2022. I'd like to see him go to 32 to 35% of the snaps in this. It might not be great for the Ravens, by the way, if that happened, because what it's going to mean is they don't have the kind of production or the kind of health out of edge that they would really like to have. So but it would be a good season for him if he's certainly able to do that. I want him to increase his pressures by pocket compression, but I don't want to put any limit on that. I'm not expecting a bunch of sacks. I just want some effective discomfort caused on the quarterback that forces him to move, forces him to throw away, forces him to get some tipped balls potentially by getting close to the backfield, or forces some quicker bad decisions. So just some pocket compression, that's all. Continues to make plays for other. I like his tackling to improve, but again, that's on such a small scale. I don't think that's really a big deal. I think it will kind of naturally regress to kind of his average for his career. And the biggest thing of all that I can say, because a lot of that is ethereal in terms of statistically measuring it, but I think if it's obvious that the Ravens want him back for 2024 under a very similar deal, I think that's a perfect season. I think that's a great season. He talked about playing 10 years in the NFL. If he gets back for 2024, he's got it. And I think that, the Ravens will be very short-handed at defensive line in 2024. There will be a strong predilection to trying to keep someone they have, whether it's one of their current 4th-year guys that they extend, whether it is Urban. Travis Jones is the only one who's locked up. So Pierce is a guy, I believe Pierce is signed through next year, but I got to look this up because that's actually important, but he has the possibility of cutting him maybe too juicy. Yeah. He's got a void year starting in 2024. So he's not even under contract. So okay. They're going to have to figure out how to rebuild this defensive line. I think, Urban is a good piece to start with, or he's actually really a good place to finish with, but he'd be one of the blocks that you'd have to have.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a position group you don't really want to have a lot of turnover in one year. I feel like having some people around who know the system, be able to teach other guys is definitely important. So I would definitely agree. I think that, another one of those players like Ricard where, long term, not sure where he kind of fits in, but if he could stick around for 2024 and we feel comfortable with that, I think it's great.
Yeah, Ricard, $4 million, by the way, in freed up cap space if they don't sign him for 24. So there will be a question coming there. It's it's one of those things that they'll look at and they'll have to save money in a variety of ways. And what are you going to do?
Yeah.
All right, Chris, just a pleasure talking over this with you. Tell folks where they can read your stuff online or listen to your pods online.
Yeah, so I'm over with the folks at One Winning Pod You can find us on Twitter or YouTube or at One Winning Pod, One Winning Pod at gmail.com and all that stuff. You guys have probably heard of us, me and Alec and Peter. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm still on there at Crayborg57. Be happy to interact with everybody.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a show this offseason, still got time to get in, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. Topics are open at this point. You still can get it on for that one play, but we're right at the end of recording those at all. If you want to talk GM, if you want to talk a statistic you've developed or a measurement you think ought to be made or organizational philosophy that you think the Ravens ought to embrace, let's talk about it. And I promise to get back to you very quickly if you send me a DM. Chris, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much, Ken. Pleasure.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.